We still don't have the ordinance changed yet from the city council.
Hi, Carmel, how you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How about you, Neil?
Good.
Good.
Obviously not up with the mask stuff yet.
No, but
I
another
thought
month.
this was over.
Well, so they told staff to come back next month with the revised ordinance, emergency to repeal and replace. But they were just having the conversation whether they wanted to do that, so.
Okay, so it hasn't been decided here for the city.
It's been decided, but the actual, like, you know, the legal paperwork side of it, you know, actually repealing and replacing the ordinance, that happens in November. So then it'll be effective right after that.
All right, so it's gonna stay in place till then?
Until November, that's right. Yeah,
And
for
that's
all
also with the council meetings?
all public meetings until then. But that's the next council meeting coming up is November, so. We'll start that meeting in November with having to wear a mask, and then after they say the magic words, and they adopt the ordinance, repeal and replace, you
Okay.
can take your mask off, throw it in the air like it's a graduation cap.
Okay, so the first council meeting in November will be a mask.
It'll start that way.
Will there be public in the room or?
Yeah, just like we've been doing it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so we will get started here. Well, welcome to everybody here in person, the 3 of you, and people online and anybody watching this in the future. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jermel Laurie. I'm the building official, City of Carmel, and we're going to be going over some code updates for the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea for the 2022 code going into effect on January 1. Just caveat the presentation by stating that this is essentially an overview of the codes that will be affecting the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea proper. We won't be going to do a comprehensive code update and getting into the weeds of anything that doesn't apply to the City of Carmel. So let's get started. We're going to start with the energy code update, since that is has the most robust changes that will affect the City of Carmel. I'll also let you know if you do have any questions or comments, please take down the slide number, which I have at the bottom right of all of my slides. If you have any questions, you can reference the slide number and I can answer your questions. Hopefully you can see that. All right, here we go. So 2022 Energy Code overview. This is all buildings overview. Then we'll go into single family, mandatory and prescriptive, and then additions and alterations. We won't spend a lot of time on multifamily reorganization, and then there'll be plenty of resources which we will also post on the city website. Once the presentation is over, you will have all of the resources that I've gathered for my presentation. So the goals for the new energy code: increase building energy efficiency cost effectively, contribute to the greenhouse gas reduction goals, enable pathways for all electric buildings, reduce residential building impacts on the electricity grid, promote demand, flexibility, and self-utilization of PV systems, and provide tools for local government reach codes. This is just a schedule of how the energy code came to be. We're essentially at the point where the codes will just go into effect on January 1, 2023. All building permit applications submitted on or after January 1 must use the 2022 software and forms for energy efficiency. If you go to the the California Energy Commission's website, I'll also reference these at the end of the presentation, but they have all of your resources, the code itself, appendices, and compliance manuals. Some highlights will be the heat pump baselines, solar and battery storage, ventilation requirements, LED baselines, and multifamily restructuring. So with our mandatory requirements, they must always be met, and there can never be a trade-off if you choose to go the prescriptive route. There are various trade-offs that can be made, again, using the energy code software. Again, the prescriptive approach is the most simple approach, and it'll be more common for alterations. In new construction, it gives a lot more flexibility for trade-offs. These are all the energy design rating performance requirements based on your performance approach. How you demonstrate compliance, these are the various forms I'll go into in future slides. The energy code is separated and made more straightforward, the requirements between single family, multifamily, and non-residential, and that's how they've split up the 3 categories for compliance now. These are the specific certificates of compliance that you will need to submit at the end of a project depending on the classification. So the most significant changes just revises the baselines for performance and meeting the code requirements, establishes more electric-ready requirements, improves the provisions for solar and battery storage with exceptions, and updates kitchen ventilation requirements. Overall, it tries to provide more clarity and consistency in the code. And once again, in the change of between the different types of buildings, they relocate the multifamily provisions into a new dedicated set of chapters. All right, all buildings, mandatory requirements. There's this particular spot, and we won't be spending time on each slide. There's quite a few of them. This is more for community scale projects, so won't particularly apply to us. This one does. The HVAC efficiency mandatory requirements have been increased. So whether it's your furnaces or your cooling towers, your boilers, they just have to meet more stringent standards. So you'll have to keep that in mind when designing your system. So for single family, these are the classifications: R3, 2 or less dwellings, non-multifamily hotel or motel, townhouses, group 3.1, again, may not apply to Carmel specifically, and U occupancy groups on residential sites, meaning garages. So insulation mandatory requirements, they have made some changes for roof deck, ceiling, and rafter roof insulation. The main one falls under the building code. If you were to design a house under the building code rather than the residential code, there are some more strict insulation requirements. We will get into that a little deeper later on in the slides here. The insulation requirements, I wouldn't say have been reduced, but they've made exceptions for the ducts and air handling portions of the HVAC systems within the conditioned space of a home. It does not require insulation in those areas if you choose to design your system that way. So lighting requirements. Specifically, LED light sources. They're making vast improvements in the LED lighting. So there are various classifications, solid state lighting, which is essentially all the various types of LED lighting that are required. This table is actually a good reference here. On the left side of the slide, numbers 1 through 6 are not required to be JA8 compliant. So your light cans installed outdoors, other LEDs for decorative lighting, pin-based fluorescent light source using electronic ballasts. If you're hardwired into a high-frequency generator induction lamp, you're not required, and ceiling fan kits that have to be other lighting requirements, but not the JA8 requirements. All other recessed lighting, downlight within the homes are required to be JA8 compliant, and any lighting that is not specifically listed on this table. So ventilation requirements, the ducts are still required to be R value 6 or better. Again, this exception about the duct systems located in conditioned spaces. There are portions where if you go through unconditioned space, the entering and coming back through into the conditioned space are not required to be insulated, but the portions that are in the unconditioned space are. This just clarifies the conditions and terminology for the duct sealing tests. I don't believe it's mentioned on the slides, but there is a new requirement. The previous requirement was 40 feet of ducting. If 40 feet of ducting was to be replaced, then you had to have the duct sealage test. That's been reduced to 20 feet. So that's an intensification of that requirement. Stricter requirements for ventilation and indoor quality. More stricter controls and specifications for air dampers and damper control in variable ventilation systems. This starts to get into the kitchen and bath exhaust requirements. And it's not totally straightforward. They do, and it'll get into it further down as well. But your minimum CFM for what they define as an enclosed kitchen, if it's 12 feet by 14 feet or less, you're only required to have a 100 CFM fan. If it is not an enclosed kitchen, those CFM rating requirements increase exponentially, and we'll have a chart, a table showing us this. So your vented range hood, as I stated before, if you're less than 12 by 14 feet, it'll be 100. Essentially, your standard will be 300 CFM for any other exhaust fans. The exhaust fans don't necessarily have to be, if you don't have a kitchen hood, you're not required to have a kitchen hood, but you are required to have an exhaust fan with 300 CFM minimum. Bathrooms are still 50 CFM. There's no change in there.
So is that a fan in addition to the kitchen exhaust fan?
It will be, yes. If you have to meet the total CFM requirements. And the way most kitchens are designed now is usually open. You know, you've got a kind of a great room for everybody to congregate in. So typically your minimum CFM requirement will be 300 CFMs.
Even if it's open to the living room?
Yes.
dining room?
Yep. I think the intent is they don't want anybody smelling the food that you're cooking. So these are the requirements for the range hood airflow rates. If you do have a range hood, and they have different standards, whether it's electric or gas.
So that is in addition to the range hood, is that what you said? The range hood?
No, these are the requirements. If you have a range hood, these are the specific requirements for the range hood, and they base it on the floor area of the dwelling unit, on the square footage. So
having the range hood, they still have to put a separate exhaust fan. with 300 CFM.
not particularly if you have the range hood that meets all of the CFMs, you will not have to put the additional fan in.
Okay, thank you.
Again, another table showing the airflow and indoor air quality mandatory requirements. Your mechanical engineers or energy designers will be using this table. It's a little bit more restrictive than the previous code cycle. You will have to have labels on these systems. It's going to be a big part of that. All right, here's the biggest portion that's going to be affecting residential use. You will still be able to use gas water heaters. However, you are going to have to dedicate space. The energy code is requiring 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet by 7 feet tall. Dedicated space specifically for your electric heat pump. So they give you options here. If you're within 3 feet of the water heater, meaning your dedicated space, then you need to provide the 125 volt 20 amp circuit with 120 243 conductor, your typical wiring. You'll need to reserve and label the single pole breaker in the main panel for that. So in addition to that is not on the energy code requirements, you're also going to have plumbing set up as well. You'll need to have hot and cold water supply. So essentially, at any time that the homeowner decides to go to an electric water heat pump, they can disconnect and plug and play. They can go down to the big box store, buy what they need to, and it's ready to go. Now, if you install your dedicated space more than 3 feet from the water heater, now you're installing a 240 volt 30 amp circuit. Again, you're going to need to label the breaker in the main panel. You'll need to have the water line. So I guess I may have been mistaken. If you're within 3 feet, you won't have to have the water lines. If you're over 3 feet, then you'll need to have the water supply ready for that, and a condensate drain all ready to go. Energy storage systems, backup batteries, they need to be ESS ready. You do not have to install a backup battery at the time. This is for new construction of homes. But you will have to have interconnection equipment, which means you'll need to have a dedicated sub-panel that supplies each of these branch circuits. You'll have to have 4 supplied branch circuits one of these will supply the refrigerator, lighting near the front door, one outlet in the bedroom, and it does not specify what the fourth circuit is for, but I suppose that would be your choice. Main panel minimum bus bar rating of 225 amps. That's already required by the electrical code for your solar system. Again, you'll need also to set up space for your transfer switch within 3 feet of the main panel. That will be your backup supply for the sub panel once you have a backup battery set up. And you'll have to have all of your raceways and isolation equipment to allow the connection of that power source. So for your space heater for your furnace, even though you're supplying a furnace, if it's a gas furnace, you're going to have to supply a 240 volt 30 amp circuit 3 feet from the furnace, and you need to reserve that circuit in the panel. It's the same application with a 50 amp circuit. Needs to be dedicated for electric cooktop ready. Again, reinforcing use at this point in this cycle, which I'm not sure if this will be the last one or not. You will still be allowed to use gas cooktops, but you do need to dedicate the infrastructure for electric stoves. And the same applies for clothes dryers. So at all of these locations, you're going to have these plugs in place and the dedicated breakers in the panel. This goes back to what I was referencing before. If you have a 12 by 14 enclosed kitchen, you'll have to have at least 100 CFM fan, which does not exceed a total of 60 square feet. Basically, if you have two doorways, anything larger than that, two standard doorways, then you're going to be jumping up into the next portion. If you do not install that range hood, once again, you need a minimum 300 CFM fan or 5 air changes per hour to meet the ventilation requirements. And yes, if you have the going back to your question, sir, if you have the 100 CFM fan, then you need to install at least an additional ceiling or wall exhaust of 140. Okay, single family updates. So our climate zone is climate zone 3. Essentially, the allowance of the gas appliances, you will use the performance compliance approach. That's where the electrical requirements for electric ready appliances comes from. These are all the tables for your requirements: duct installation, your whole house ventilation, and your heating and cooling. Dwelling units, 500 square feet or less, ADUs are exempt from these requirements. So this is kind of going back over domestic water heating systems. Whether you go with a heat pump, you go with solar water heating system with electric backup, Again, this goes back to our exceptions. Again, we're in climate zone 3. You can install the gas water heater, but you do have to have the infrastructure for the electric. Again, ADUs and other dwelling units less than 500 square feet are exempt from that requirement. These are some of the solar requirements. They've gotten a little stricter. The solar contractors will be very aware of these requirements and exceptions. Solar is still required for ADUs. So on any additions, if you're going to be adding any additional space conditioning systems, you'll probably be putting, if you're still using HVAC, you'll be adding more than 20 feet of ducting. You'll be required to have the duct sealage test. If you're replacing an existing heating system in a house, you're still going to be allowed to replace like for like. You won't be required to go electric at this point in time. These are some prescriptive requirements. There's no real change in the insulation requirements for our climate zone. The whole house ventilation systems, if you do an addition 1,000 square feet or less, you won't have to install one of the systems, but new ADUs, again, unless it's less than 500 square feet, will be required to install those systems. Okay, so I was 5 feet off. It's more than 25 feet. So the previous was 40, and then it's been reduced to 25. The duct leakage standards have been reduced. I believe it was 15% in the previous cycle. Now it is 10 or less in order to pass the duct sealage test. This one may be a big one for existing homes. If you have an existing space heater, say in the hallway, you have a gas space heater, you will not be able to replace that with a standard electric resistant heater. I guess I read that wrong. Non-ducted systems. This is basically reiterating, if you're replacing your entire system, you're going to be getting a duct sealage test. Roof replacements, not applicable. Attic insulation, nothing's changed for our climate zone. So range hood, if you're going to be changing out your range hood, you do need to get HERS verification. If you have a contractor doing this, they should be getting pretty familiar with this very quickly. I do expect we will run into and have to provide some instruction on how to complete the verification forms for some contractors. So multifamily, we're gonna skip over a lot of the multifamily. We So your online resources, again, this presentation will be available on our website shortly following our my presentation today. All of these can be found on California Energy Commission's website. Energy Code ACE is a fairly good resource as well, especially if you as a homeowner want to try to, or a designer would rather design these yourself rather than going to an energy compliance specialist. So that's the end of the Energy Code update. There we go. Okay. So these are the significant changes to the building code, more specifically, mainly our residential codes.
This is State of California code?
State of California.
Isn't there an additional building code for Carmel?
I am going to go over two of the municipal codes that the city council will be approving upon submission at the first reading in November, and then the second reading will be in December. And if I remember correctly, I believe the municipal code changes will go into effect on January 7th. No major changes, but I'll be going over those towards the end of this slideshow here as well.
Thank you. I'm sorry for
No worries. The first major change is specific definitions. They basically had a ground-mounted system. They've added definitions to differentiate between a ground-mounted system and a support structure. If you go by a lot of schools or perhaps an airport where they're now using the solar systems essentially as carports, they've just provided a definition for each of those to differentiate the difference between the systems. Now, what you'll notice is the crossed out language is what was taken out of the previous code, and everything that is underlined is the new language that was added in for this code cycle. What they've done here is specifically provided a definition for a townhouse unit. You'll see in a slide coming up the reason to separate, but a townhouse itself is the combined units, the entire building itself, and the townhouse unit is each single unit of that townhouse. So for irregular buildings, these are buildings built on very steep slopes that exceed 1.5 units, 1 vertical and 5 horizontal. What this specifically does is it provides the definition and then has increased requirements as far as foundations and how the structure is required to be built. And this is a continuation of the previous slide. Where item 8, when all of the following apply, you are required to get engineering, essentially is what it says. Okay, in this new code cycle, they've added an exception for story heights, where you previously weren't able to exceed 11 foot 7 inches for bearing walls. You're now allowed to go up to 13 foot 7 inches. As long as you follow the following exceptions, I think, are coming up. Oh, I guess I'll need to edit this and add exception 2. But essentially, if you get an engineered design, you'll be able to get a 13 foot 7.
Makes sense.
Oh, this for opening protection, this is for the requirement for where you have the self-closing door requirement coming from an attached garage into a dwelling area. They added that the doors shall be self-latching as well. So in addition to having a self-closing or automatic closing device, the door actually needs to be able to latch on its own. Some door closers are not strong enough, and in the past, yeah, it doesn't create that seal that we need to protect from the vehicle exhaust. So Inhabitable Rooms, they have, actually this is very interesting. For habitable rooms other than kitchens, if you're not required to have an egress window or door, and you can get the air changes per hour that are required, then no egress window is required. Yeah. Again, in kitchens, where you're not required to have egress, you don't need windows. So, I don't know anybody. There may be situations where that might be necessary or to meet planning conditions, perhaps, in the city of Carmel. That may be accomplished if you have a whole house ventilation system. They've added 2 exceptions. The previous exceptions I did not include. These are the 2 added exceptions. If you have less than 80-inch height of the basement, they're saying that you're not required to have an egress rescue opening. So as long as you have a door, you do not have to put in a window or a window well. If it's shorter than 80 inches, and if you have sleeping rooms, as long as you have a door that you have an egress door, essentially you're not required to have an egress window. If your basement's less than 200 square feet, again, you're not required to have an egress window. Obviously you're going to have a door into that space, and so the Building Standards Commission has decided that that's acceptable. The other exception, storm shelters. If you have an automatic sprinkler system, again, No windows required in basements with sleeping rooms. And if you have one door or two doors from the basement, the second door would count as your second means of egress. They've just taken out a bunch of the language just to clarify. You need not less than 5.7 square feet. It'll be 5 at grade. Your standard minimum dimensions. That section was just put in for more clarity. This I included because rather than having your basic window well where you need a minimum 36-inch and then you can put a ladder, this provides a different design for the means of egress. So rather than have the ladder, I see if you have, you can put doors instead of windows as your emergency egress. It does not have to meet the definition of a door size as long as you have the the dimensions required. You can have a door in front of instead of a window. So if you have stairways that are not attached to a building, porch, or a deck, you have stairways going to non-habitable spaces, and you have stairways going to crawl spaces, they are not required to meet the code requirements of stairs. Section 3. This is quite a significant one as well. So this is protection of wood from decay. So wood joists or wood structural floor that is within 18 inches to exposed ground, wood girders that are within 12 inches, and wood columns or posts that are closer than 8 inches are now all required to be pressure treated. Yeah, that'll be expensive. And anything resting directly on concrete, and once again, anything closer than 8 inches to the exposed ground are going to be required to be pressure treated. Any exterior structural supports are going to be required. So now your exterior balconies will also be required to be built with pressure treated lumber. Our area does not meet this exception. This is just new code language in the state code. Number 9 is a little bit interesting. If you have floor slabs projecting at least 1 inch above the floor and separated by a concrete pier, then it's not required to be pressure treated. Otherwise, pressure treated. Sure, I didn't skip anything. Okay, they've created a standard and a definition for habitable attics. Essentially, what it says is, and if you have a sprinklered house, you can create a habitable attic, and it does not even count as an extra floor if it is less than 1/3 of the floor below. If it's a sprinkled home, then you are allowed up to half the square footage of the story below. This is the language that I just talked about. There's specific design in the code. I didn't put any illustrations in my slides, but they do provide a design, and I believe they'll provide it in the code.
This is brand new, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, everything underlined is new language. Now, even though it's not considered a floor, if the habitable attic is located above a third story, will not apply to Carmel, but it will have to have a fire sprinkler. Energy storage systems shall be installed in only the following locations: detached garages and detached accessory structures, attached garages that already meet the required fire separations, outdoors, not less than 3 feet from doors or windows directly entering the dwelling unit, enclosed utility closets, basements, storage or utility spaces within dwellings, and they shall not be installed in sleeping rooms or closets or spaces opening directly into sleeping rooms. The same application as your standard water heater. I do have the feeling that this may change, especially with local issues and battery fires and things like that.
Yeah.
My suggestion is that you install these outdoors, because there will come a point where a definition will have to be made about when your garage becomes an energy storage room or cabinet. Once they've definitively figured that out, it's going to require a 2-hour fire separation. That's currently in the fire code as well. So I predict this will change in the next cycle, and I don't even think they'll allow them to be in attached garages, but I could be wrong. This new section here is just a requirement for protection of your energy storage system, your backup battery, for impact protection. It needs to be 48 inches above the finished floor, and you'll need impact protection. Now there's some odd exceptions to this, and I believe it will be in a future slide. But if you have if your garage door opening is less than a certain height, meaning you're not going to be able to fit a Yukon or a Tahoe into the garage, then they allow the energy storage system to be mounted a little bit lower. For foundation waterproofing, 6 mil is no longer acceptable. 10 mil is the minimum thickness that you'll need for foundation waterproofing. Apparently, they've done some studies that suggest that 6 mil is just not efficient enough to provide the waterproofing. This goes to the vapor retarder. Once again, 6 mil is the minimum requirement is now 10 mil. I know there are a lot of contractors that their standard is 15, so I don't know if that'll change much for anybody, but 6 mil is no longer acceptable. This is kind of a big deal. So for roof sheeting, for our wind zone speed, which is 110, all roof sheeting is now going to be 6 inches on center. So No more 6 and 12, it's all going to be 6 and 6. 6 in the field and 6 on the edges. So you're going to have to budget for that. So this is specifically for stone and masonry veneer in our seismic design category D. If you exceed the first story, they have specific requirements for veneer attachments. So if you want the whole house to look nice and Carmel-like with the Carmel stone, and it's a 2-story house, you're gonna have some engineering involved there. This is another big one that affects Carmel. They've added this section for water resistive barriers in moist or marine climates. Odd thing about this is they reference the international codes, which are the model codes, which we do not adopt, but these are the model codes for the state. And so they designate our area, and for obvious reasons, as marine climate zone. So now, in addition to your water resistive barrier, on top of your water resistive barrier, you'll need to add another layer of drainage material. What this code now says is not less than 3/16 of an inch in depth, and shall be added to the exterior side of the water resistive barrier. In addition to that, drainage on the exterior side shall have a drainage efficiency of not less than 90%. 5-minute Google search brought up more than 3 products that can easily achieve this. Now, they are not, most of these products are not 5 millimeters thick. However, as the authority having jurisdiction, I will accept alternative means and methods, because the manufacturers of these products do meet the ASTM standards, and they exceed the minimum draining, the drainage requirement of 90%. I threw this section in here for wood roof framing. The long and the short explanation of this particular new language is that if you have a vaulted ceiling, essentially it needs to be engineered, and you need to get a stamp on it, because they have more enhanced requirements for ceiling joist connections, as basically the whole roofing system altogether. You're
We just need an engineer, period.
almost. Again, ceiling joists and rafter connections. There's a whole there's a more stringent fastening requirement. There's several new tables that just call for more hurricane ties and joist hold downs and the rest of it. This is a new requirement or more clarification for vents in the wildland urban interface area. So in our high fire severity zones, it just needs to essentially meet the state fire marshal requirements to resist intrusion from embers and flame through ventilation openings. Okay, now we're getting into the municipal, the number 1 of 2. Our municipal code changes. So the city council has indicated that they are going to approve the amendment to the municipal code. In the bold lettering is the language, the valuation of $200,000 shall apply to all construction over a cumulative 5-year period prior to and/or after installation of a main electrical service panel. This really gets around some developers who either just piecemeal projects over a period of 5 years and do different portions of remodels and additions to stay under the $200,000 threshold. So this kind of stops them from getting around that, or getting a panel change out and then coming through and doing a $500,000 remodel on a house. And previously we didn't have this language in the code to enforce the undergrounding requirement. So the council was supportive of the amendment to kind of just make this the requirement that it should have been in the first place. The second amendment to the municipal code, it doesn't change anything as far as the sprinkler requirements go. It just includes the different building materials used in wall construction, just for clarification, so that the plans designers can do their linear wall calculations and know whether sprinklers are going to be required or not. So these are a couple more changes in the building and the residential code. The Building Standards Commission has extended the requirement from 6 months to 1 year between inspections. So now you have 1 year from the date of permit issuance to start your project, and then you are required to have one of the required inspections per the building code. Your project your permit will stay valid for up to another year. This one, the second one, the maximum door widths in commercial construction. This is, from an architectural standpoint, this is pretty interesting. Previously, you were only able to have a 48-inch max door width. If you had double doors, each door was a 48-inch max. Now, essentially, there's no language limiting the size of the door. As long as you meet all of the other requirements, threshold requirements, pushing width, door closing time, as long as you meet all the other code requirements for commercial doors, you could see 6 or 8 foot wide doors, as long as you meet the ADA requirements as well, of course. Studios now have a definition, efficiency dwelling units, not to be confused with ADUs. But if you're building in a studio, you still have to have all the requirements essentially of an ADU. You need to have a place for cooking, eating, and sleeping, and you need to have a bathroom as well. But previously, that space requirement was required to be 220 square feet minimum, and they've allowed that to be reduced to 190 square feet. I put this so this building code section 1202.3 insulation requirement of unvented attics. I left that as a note to myself because it is fairly significant. I'm not sure if it applies to the residential code yet. I need to do some further digging into that. But from the building code standpoint, the language states that if you have air permeable insulation in an unvented attic, they now have a requirement for the ridge venting and putting a gas permeable layer over your essentially your vented ridge cap, and that apparently is to allow off gassing and allow the insulation to dry if it gets wet for any reason. This is just a reiteration of the requirements for the electric heat pumps, whether it's for temperature control or your water heaters. Lots of dedicated circuits, and they need to be labeled. So that is the end of this presentation. So is there anybody online, or Neil, do you have any questions?
Yes. Now this will be available online?
Yes, yes. We'll be posting this in the building portion of the city website.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. One of the things, we've always had this issue about the 1-inch ventilation space required in a vaulted ceiling. And the way you could get around it was by using rigid core,
Closed
rigid
cell.
foam,
Yeah.
and pack it in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you wouldn't have to have that 1-inch ventilation. But some insulators are telling me that's still not good. They say it still tends to develop moisture over a period of years. I'm talking to older guys who undo these old roofs.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any change in anything that would affect that? I mean, you can spray a closed cell foam, I understand, directly on the ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
but that's very expensive.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been anything to change any of that, has there?
So the gentleman's question was regarding the 1-inch clearance requirement for unvented attics. Has anything changed? As far as that go, I think, and like I said, I need to look on the residential side and do more investigation on that. I think the code section that I pointed out regarding the ridge ventilation requirement with the gas permeable top layer, I believe that's what they've put into the code to address that.
Okay, good. This is kind of a fussy, tricky question, but I do a lot of code conformance, people who get red tagged. And I was always hoping that we could go back to the code that was in force and effect at the time that the building was done. Okay. But the answer that I received is, no, you can't. You still have to meet the latest modern code. Even if you're doing code conformance, let's say they added a bedroom 10 years ago, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to say, can I use the code from 10 years ago? I believe the answer is no. You have to use the modern code. Is there any allowance for that in code conformance?
I think the answer, so again, just for clarity, I'm just repeating the question for the video, but it's if there's an issue with code compliance and a permit needs to be pulled to essentially legalize unpermitted construction. So the way the code reads is that the construction needs to be up to the standards of the current code at the time of permit issuance.
So, and just to illustrate why I'm concerned, because various agencies are now becoming much more firm about that, and they will ask, for example, somebody's done added a bedroom with a slab floor,
Mm-hmm.
and so now they're asking, well, we're going to ask you to core that slab so that we can see how it was built. So everybody's using the 5-6 mil vapor barriers.
Mm-hmm.
So almost anything built in the past, technically speaking, you're gonna have to tear down the whole room, because you don't have 10 mil, underneath your concrete. Is that the way that's gonna work?
Well, I don't know if I'd make that decision here in Carmel, but I can't imagine a lot of stuff has been built without permits in Carmel. But I am never that surprised. I can't speak to the county and how they, or other jurisdictions and how they enforce their codes. So I'll just leave it there.
Lenience on that.
Yeah.
So, if they've tried to do the best, or they used what was appropriate, that's fairly good. Are these dollar amounts gonna change due to inflation? Because that's happening rather quickly now. $200,000 amounts in the code. Do they have anything in there for adjusting those amounts based on inflation?
No, we currently don't. In fact, I believe that $200,000 threshold was, I believe that was, if memory serves me correctly, I believe that was changed about 6 years ago when I first came. Because in 2016, when I started as a building inspector, I know that the requirement was if you switched out your panel, then it was required to go underground. And I know there were lots of people that were very upset with the requirement.
Yes.
And that's when it was, and I believe the following year it was changed to the $200,000 threshold. But I don't think that threshold will change anytime soon.
There's probably some flexibility there. And I had heard, Jamil, that that one portion of the new code was already in effect, and that is the administrative portion. Is that true, or does it all go into effect on January 1, 2023?
The way I understand it, all of the 2022 codes go into effect January 1, 2023. I don't know if any of the chapters of that code. No, the answer is no. Yeah, there are energy codes that have over time become more stringent, and a lot of the energy codes as far as efficiency of the appliances themselves, they have been going up, and I think that the manufacturers are aware of that. I don't think there's going to be any issue with meeting all of the current requirements for efficiency. But the straight answer is no. Anything in the 2022 state codes do not go into effect until January 1, 2023.
January 11.
January 1.
January 1.
Yeah. The municipal code changes because of adoption and the adoption rules. They will go into effect on January 7th.
Okay. And if we submit our plans for a plan check before that date, does that qualify us for the old code, or do we actually have to have the permit before January 1?
Any permit submittal that is submitted prior to January 1 will fall under the 2019 codes. Now, I will also caveat that with the building department isn't going to accept 2 sheets of plans for a large remodel just so that somebody can get in under the deadline. If you're going to be submitting for a building permit, you need to have at least the minimal requirements for a plan submittal.
Yeah. That's what happens, isn't it? I think that's it. No, thank you very much. This has really been helpful.
You're welcome, Neil. Hey, Sebastian, do we have any questions from online? Okay, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, if anybody has any questions, feel free. I will take that as no questions, but I will thank Brian, Lewis Builders, Thomas, Samuel, and Victor for attending and watching me live. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the presentation. Once again, this presentation will be posted on the city's website, as well as my slides. I will also attach a bunch of PDFs that you'll also be able to find on the Energy Commission and the Building Standards Codes websites, but I'll get you direct links to those for everything that applies directly to my presentation today. If you guys have any other questions in the future, feel free to call me, email me, or come in. Thank you again. Take care, everybody. You're welcome.
The calculations for 50% wall for fire, you guys have your own formulas that you use for that, or do we go by?
We do. We actually have a formula.